Welcome back. I'm Dr. Cheek. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. And as I said in my previous video, today we're going to talk a little bit about emotions. So I'd like to start by first defining what emotions are. So emotions themselves are just a psychological mind state that's a reflection of and a reaction to both our internal and external environments. Emotions themselves are innate, they're inborn, they're natural. Contrary to popular belief, we all have emotions. What differs is how we express those emotions and how we actually internalize and feel those emotions. And although we like to feel like we have control of our emotions, we have limited control over what emotion we feel. However, we do have the ability to manipulate those emotions based on what we're thinking and our perceptions of certain situations. Now, there are many theories that kind of speculate or state how emotions occur. So there are some theories that believe we have a bodily response. And once we're able to identify what that bodily response is, we attach an emotion label to it. So if my heart is racing, I must feel anxious. There are some theories that state we feel the emotion in conjunction with our bodily response or physiological response. And based on those two things combined, that kind of dictates how we feel or what we feel like we're feeling in those moments. There's also the theory that we sometimes the external environment kind of dictates how we're feeling. So something happens around us, our body responds to it, and then we have an emotional response as it relates to how we're responding to our external environment. There are multiple theories that I kind of feel like they're the chicken and egg theories, like which comes first? Is it the emotion or the behavior or the bodily response? Which one comes first? So my stance on emotions are that the emotions are a combination of both what's happening in our internal and external environment, and how we assess what that internal and external cue has caused our body to respond and the way it has caused our body to respond. So what physiological or bodily responses are occurring as it relates to what's happening in our environment. And also sometimes there are times when we simply feel an emotion, we feel a way, and we don't necessarily know what the cause of it is and what's happening in the moment. Being able to assess that is actually helpful. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? I think something happens either outside of us or internally for us, and then an emotion is elicited, and based off that emotion, our body responds. So earlier in the video, I stated that we can manipulate or somewhat control our emotions based off our thoughts and our perceptions of what's happening, either internally for us or externally. And just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I remember when I was kind of transitioning from the network side of IT to the business side of IT, and I had an interview with a great woman. She kind of helped me get in graduate school. She helped me get into the business side of IT outside of the network side. She's been a great help throughout this process, and I appreciate everything she's done. Yvette, if you're listening, thank you. But I digress. So in the interview, she asked me a question that I'd never been asked before. And her question was, if we were at a team lunch, which we did quite often, if we were at a team lunch and I got up from the table to go wherever, and as soon as I walked away from the table, everyone started to laugh, what would I think? So my initial response was, well, I guess my thoughts would be that someone at the table said something funny. Someone made a joke. We worked in the IT space, and if you've ever worked in the IT space, understand that dark humor and sexual humor happens quite frequently. So you kind of learn to roll with the punches. And I have the sense of humor doesn't bother me at all, so it's hilarious. So I would just assume someone made a joke at the table and move on. I go where I need to go, come back. Mood hasn't changed, mood hasn't shifted. Still feel the same level of self-confidence, no mood fluctuations at all. However, if I look at that situation differently, if I'm the type of person who gets up from the table and as soon as someone starts to laugh or the entire table starts to laugh, and my thought process or my perception of the situation at that point is someone said something about me. Someone made a joke about me, or I have something on the back of my clothes that they're kind of talking about. So in either way, I'm feeling like they are looking at me or viewing me negative in some way. And that'll cause a shift in my mood. That'll cause a shift in my emotions. I'll go from probably feeling somewhat content or happy in that moment because we're out at lunch and you don't have to pay for it, to feeling like, oh my God, I'm self-conscious now. I feel like my self-confidence isn't as high. And now I come back to the table. I may have an attitude. I may be upset. I may be less talkative. I may be more standoffish because now my mood has shifted based on my perception of what just happened. And that's kind of how we can manipulate our emotions and control our emotions to some extent based off of how we perceive a situation and what we're thinking about the situation. Now, emotions themselves are not an all or nothing proposition. Like, they exist on a continuum, and they exist to varying degrees and varying levels of intensity. So we all know the basic emotions. So happy, sad, mad, worried, scared, those basic emotions. However, all of these emotions themselves exist on a continuum, and the intensity is different. So let's take happy, for instance. Happy is kind of midway as far as emotions are concerned, and sometimes we don't necessarily have the words to kind of express how we're feeling. If we didn't understand that emotions existed on a continuum, we wouldn't get that sometimes being content falls under the umbrella of happy, because we're content. Nothing bad is happening, nothing good is happening, but we're okay. And it's okay to be content. But also, there are times when we are elated, and elated feels much different than content. Elated elicits a different internal bodily response for us than content, and elated also elicits a different behavior from us than content. Worried exists on that same continuum. Anxiety, I can go from feeling a little uncomfortable, which may not cause me any internal discomfort, any changes in my bodily sensations, to being fearful, terrified. If I'm fearful or terrified, my internal body response is going to be different, and how I behave as it relates to those emotions will be different. Being really clear, being more emotionally aware, and understanding that our emotions have varying degrees of intensity and exist on a continuum kind of helps us become more aware of those emotions. And I like to use my handy dandy little feeling chart, and I use this chart not because people aren't aware of their feelings, but because we don't always necessarily know how to put words to the feelings, and we also don't understand the intensity. So let's take anger for instance. We always like to say we go from 0 to 100. However, we don't take the time to notice those small changes in our moods, those small changes in our emotions. We don't notice when we go from slightly irritated to annoyed to frustrated. Now I'm angry. Now I'm enraged. We don't notice that progression. And because we don't notice that progression, we feel like we go from 0 to 100 really quickly. However, we really probably don't notice what emotion we're feeling until we get to 75. So it's not that you're going from 0 to 100. You're just not making yourself aware of those emotional cues before you get to 100. So this is what being able to put words to how you're feeling in those moments, even in those small moments where it's not causing any type of reaction out of you, being aware can help us manage our emotions a little better. And with managing our emotions, we're better able to manage the behavioral expression of those emotions. So let me be really clear. Emotions and behaviors are not the same thing. Simply feeling an emotion does not elicit an automatic behavioral response. The same way I said emotions are innate and natural, we're all born with it, behaviors themselves are learned. They're learned based off our environment. They're learned based off our previous experiences. They're learned based off of life circumstances. So behaviors themselves are learned, and there is no behavior attached to an emotion. Your behavioral response, 9 times out of 10, to an emotion is a choice. And there's a caveat to that, because there's a point when our emotions can become so elevated that our fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in. And when that fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in, if we're not emotionally aware and we just continue to escalate and our emotions continue to amplify, the chances are that, like I said before in that trauma video, this front part of your brain that allows you to reason and think things through, think about the consequences of your action and try to make sense of what's happening around you, goes offline. And you're pretty much driven by your emotions. You're not making decisions based off of your thought process and being able to reason things through. You're making emotion-based decisions. And emotion-based decisions can cause behavior reactions that may or may not be a reflection of who you want to be or who you truly are. Understand that behaviors are about 95% in our control. And being able to be more emotionally aware of or understanding your emotional state in those moments can better help you manage your emotions so that you're better able to manage your behavioral expression of those emotions. So I want you to be clear that your emotions don't get to dictate or justify your behavioral expression. Your emotions themselves are valid, are truly a representation of how you're feeling internally, but emotions are not facts. Emotions are simply our understanding of how we're feeling in the moment as it relates to our internal and external environment, not facts. Our behaviors are what we choose to display as a reflection of how we're feeling in those moments. Along the same lines of emotions not being facts, they are an interpretation of our external environment. That's why we don't want to take away the fact that your emotions are valid, but it's not a true reflection of what may or may not be happening in your environment. So for instance, let's say I'm in a grocery store and someone walks up behind me and they get really, really close and I start to feel uncomfortable. Now, I'm feeling uncomfortable, so there may not be any bodily responses, but the closer and closer they're getting, my emotions start to escalate to where I'm starting to feel worried. And now I'm starting to feel a little fearful. And all of these things start to kick in. I might be on the verge of fight, flight, or freeze. All of this is happening. Someone is inside of my personal space. So internally, I am starting to freak out a little bit and it feels very uncomfortable and I'm very fearful. And I may choose to turn around and try to hit this person because of how I'm feeling. However, how I feel is valid, but it does not necessarily tell me that the person is dangerous behind me, because this person that's behind me, due to cultural differences, due to the way they were raised, due to things they've learned and their experiences, they may not have the same thought process or the same perception about personal space as I do. So they don't see themselves as being threatening. They don't see themselves as being in my personal space. They could probably care less about me being right there. They just need to get the strawberries that they're trying to access in that moment. But because of my internal experiences, because of how I was raised, because of experiences that I may have in the past, this person being this close to me makes me uncomfortable and fearful. And because I didn't actually make myself aware of where this was coming from, I reacted in a way that was not taking into consideration all of the facts that were happening in the environment. So this is what I mean by your emotions are valid. They are a depiction of how you're feeling. And you need to be in tune and tapped into that so you're better able to manage your behaviors. However, they're not telling you. Your emotions are not a true reflection, always, of what's happening in the environment. And we have to be willing to kind of work on that, track that, challenge it as much as you can. That's the goal for emotions and being emotionally aware. Now, there are a subset of emotions that I want to focus on specifically in other videos, and I won't talk to them right now. I just want to focus on those in other videos. So there's anger, there's anxiety, and hold on, this is a little controversial. There's also love. And right now there's a debate, there's a controversy out there that about love, in reference to love, and love being an emotion as opposed to an action. And spoiler alert, I take the stance that love is an emotion. I don't think love is a behavior. I think how we behave based off love is just our expression of that feeling. Like any other feeling, how we behave is an expression of how we feel. And what I've seen, and when I'm actually going to take the time to make that video, and I'm going to have to do a little bit more research, because what I've seen thus far is that those who that takes a stance that love is a behavior, the studies seem to focus primarily on romantic love. Now, romantic love has so many caveats to it. It's like what this person, what are your expectations for relationships? What are your expectations for your partner? And all these other things that kind of go into romantic love. And there are so many ways that we love people outside of romantic love. To use romantic love as the construct or as the bar or as the deciding factor as it relates to what if love is an emotion or behavior is like trying to use marriage to define family. Romantic love is not the only love we have. The same way a marriage is not the only way we define family. So this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit more in an upcoming video. But for right now, hopefully you got some information out of today's session. If you have any questions or concerns, put them below. I'll answer them when I get the opportunity. I want to thank you for taking your time to listen. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully something has been helpful. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.